A compassionate doctor named Dr. Mark Reynolds rescues an abandoned baby boy, changing both their lives forever. But years later, an unexpected revelation shakes Mark to his core, leaving him speechless. What shocking truth is about to come to light, and how will it alter everything he believed about family and fate? Before we dive into this emotional story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you find this story touching, don't forget to subscribe to stay connected for more tales that inspire. Dr. Mark Reynolds walked slowly through the winding paths of the city park, hands tucked into the deep pockets of his overcoat. The cool late afternoon breeze whispered through the trees, sending rustling leaves into gentle swirls around his feet. The golden light of the waning sun stretched across the landscape, casting long shadows that painted a serene yet melancholic scene. Yet, despite the beauty, Mark's heart remained heavy, burdened by the quiet solitude that had become a constant in his life since Emily, his beloved wife, had passed away. Each day since her passing, Mark felt the weight of an empty house, a space once filled with dreams of a family. He had imagined their future clearly. A home, bustling with the laughter of children, playful footsteps on the hardwood floors, and lively dinners full of conversation and love. But life, in its unpredictable way, had other plans. Emily's absence left a silence that resonated through every room, echoing the loss of what could have been. Lost in his thoughts, Mark barely noticed as he passed the playground where families gathered. The sound of children laughing, the creak of swings, and the calls of parents faded into the background of his mind, replaced by a dull ache. He had come to the park often since Emily's death, seeking solace in its familiar paths, but today felt different. There was an unsettling stillness that made him pause mid-step. At first, he thought he was imagining it, a faint, almost distinguishable sound. He cocked his head, holding his breath as he tried to pinpoint the noise. It came again, a soft, desperate whimper that seemed out of place amid the rustle of the trees and distant chatter. Mark's eyes narrowed as he turned off the main path, following the sound that drew him deeper into a secluded part of the park. The path led him to an old wooden bench half hidden by the drooping branches of an oak tree. Kneeling down, Mark's pulse quickened when he saw a small bundle nestled beneath it. The faded blue blanket was slightly frayed at the edges, and it moved subtly with each cry that came from inside. His hands trembled as he reached out and gently pulled back the fabric, revealing a baby, a beautiful, dark-skinned boy whose tiny fists waved in the air as he wailed, eyes shut tightly and face scrunched with distress. "Oh, little one," Mark whispered, his voice thick with a mix of shock and immediate empathy. The baby's cries softened at the sound of Mark's voice, as if sensing the presence of someone who cared. Mark looked around, eyes scanning the quiet expanse of the park, searching for any sign of the child's parents. But there was no one, just the distant silhouette of a jogger and the lazy rustle of leaves in the wind. The reality of the situation sank in with a sudden, cold realization. The baby had been abandoned. A surge of protectiveness welled up in Mark's chest, unfamiliar but strong. Carefully, he gathered the tiny bundle into his arms, cradling the child against his chest. The baby's wailing ceased almost immediately, replaced by small, hiccuping breaths as his wide, dark eyes blinked up at Mark, glistening with tears. Mark's heart swelled with an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time, a mix of awe, tenderness, and a profound sense of purpose. The warmth of the baby's small body seeped into him, banishing the cold emptiness he had carried for so long. He could hardly believe the transformation taking place within him at that very moment. What had started as an aimless walk had now become a pivotal encounter, one that promised to change his life in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the scene as Mark held the child close. He whispered, voice trembling, "I don't know why you're here or who brought you into my life, but I promise you're safe now." The baby, now calm and blinking curiously up at him, felt like the missing piece to a life Mark had long thought shattered beyond repair. With the baby nestled securely in his arms, Dr. Mark Reynolds took a deep breath, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. He glanced around the park one last time, half expecting to see someone running toward him, calling out for their child. But the park remained quiet, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. The realization that no one was coming set a determined resolve in his chest. With purposeful strides, Mark made his way out of the park and toward the main road, his heart pounding in rhythm with the tiny breaths of the baby against his chest. The child had stopped crying and now gazed up at Mark with wide, trusting eyes, an innocence that pierced through the layers of Mark's grief. He knew he needed to get the baby checked by professionals, so he flagged down the first cab that passed, his voice urgent as he gave the driver the address to the nearest hospital. Minutes later, Mark rushed into the emergency room, the sterile white lights glaring down as he called out, "I need help. I found this baby abandoned in the park." His voice, laced with both urgency and protectiveness, caught the attention of the medical staff. A nurse with kind eyes approached quickly, reaching out for the child. "Don't worry, we'll take good care of him," she said softly, her hands gentle as she took the baby from Mark's arms and carried him behind a set of swinging doors. Mark's arms felt suddenly empty, as if he had lost something vital. He stood there, frozen, watching the doors sway shut and listening to the muffled activity beyond them. "Sir, can you tell us what happened?" another nurse asked, guiding him to a chair in the waiting area. Mark sat, his hands still warm from holding the child, and recounted the events in a voice that shook with emotion. The nurse nodded as he spoke, offering a reassuring smile. "You did the right thing bringing him here. We'll make sure he's looked after," she said, patting his arm before heading back to the other side of the room. Left alone, Mark stared at the blank wall in front of him, his thoughts tumbling over each other. Could he walk away now? The image of the baby's small, tear-streaked face haunted him. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. The idea of returning to his empty house filled only with silence and memories felt unbearable. An hour passed, maybe more. Time seemed irrelevant as Mark waited, his eyes glued to the doors that had taken the baby from his sight. Finally, a doctor appeared, walking toward him with a calm, reassuring smile. "Dr. Reynolds?" she asked, confirming his identity. "The baby is doing well. He was a bit dehydrated, but otherwise healthy. We're contacting social services now." Relief washed over Mark, loosening the tightness in his chest. "Thank you," he said, his voice a whisper. Can I see him?" The doctor's smile faltered slightly, turning apologetic. "I'm afraid not right now. Social services will be taking over, and they'll determine the next steps. But rest assured, he'll be placed in a safe environment." Mark nodded, though the news hit him harder than he expected. The thought of the baby being taken into the system passed from stranger to stranger made his heart ache. He stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. As he prepared to leave, an idea, half-formed and reckless, began to take shape in his mind. Could he do it? Could he offer this child more than just a temporary rescue? The mere thought filled him with both excitement and fear, but the image of the baby's wide eyes and soft, hiccuping breaths pushed him forward. He reached for his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed the number for social services. "This is Dr. Mark Reynolds," he said when the line connected. "I'm calling about the baby I brought in earlier today. I need to know, what would it take for me to become his foster parent?" The room fell silent as Mark Reynolds waited for the social worker's response. His heart pounded, each beat echoing in his ears as he realized the magnitude of what he was asking. The voice on the other end paused a momentary silence that felt endless. "Dr. Reynolds, fostering a child is a serious commitment," the social worker finally said, her tone both gentle and firm. "It involves a thorough process, including background checks, home visits, and training sessions. Are you sure this is what you want?" Mark swallowed hard, his resolve tightening. "I understand," he replied, voice steadier now. "But I can't shake the feeling that this is something I need to do. He deserves someone who truly cares, not just another name on a file." There was another pause before the social worker spoke again, a hint of warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. "In that case, I can guide you through the first steps, but please know, it won't be quick or easy." "Thank you," Mark said, feeling a flicker of hope ignite. As he hung up, the empty waiting room seemed less daunting. He stood and exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing as the thought of what lay ahead took shape in his mind. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mark found himself filling out endless forms, answering questions about his history and preparing his home for inspection. He dusted off old photo frames, rearranged the furniture, and transformed a spare room that had long been untouched into a space that might one day belong to a little boy. Every step of the process felt surreal, as if he were stepping into a story not entirely his own. "Are you ready for this?" his friend and colleague Sarah asked one evening as they stood in Mark's living room. She had come by to offer her support, her eyes filled with concern and curiosity. Mark glanced around, taking in the freshly painted walls and the small bed, now dressed in soft blue sheets. "I don't know if anyone is ever truly ready for something like this," he admitted, "but I can't imagine not trying." Sarah smiled softly, placing a hand on his arm. "Well, if anyone can do this, it's you. Emily would be proud." Her words struck a chord, filling the room with a bittersweet air. Mark nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The thought of Emily brought a mix of pain and comfort. She had always believed in him, and that belief spurred him on now, guiding him as he ventured into this new chapter. Weeks passed in a blur of interviews and home assessments. Each knock on the door brought a new official, clipboard in hand, ready to question Mark's motivations and capabilities. He welcomed them all, answering each inquiry with an earnestness that surprised even him. The spare room began to take on more life. Small toys on a shelf, a mobile hanging above the bed, and curtains patterned with stars that he hoped would bring a sense of wonder to the child who might one day sleep there. Finally, the call came. Mark's heart thudded as he picked up the phone, recognizing the number on the screen. "Dr. Reynolds, I'm pleased to inform you that your application to become a foster parent has been approved," the social worker said, her voice warm with a touch of finality. For a moment, Mark could only sit in stunned silence. Relief and excitement surged through him, making his breath catch. "When can I bring him home?" he asked, hardly daring to hope. "Tomorrow," she replied. "We'll arrange for you to pick him up in the morning." The next day, Mark found himself back at the hospital, waiting in the same spot where he had handed the baby over just weeks before. The anticipation buzzed in the air as he watched the nurse approach, holding the small bundle that had already changed his life so profoundly. The baby blinked up at him, recognition or perhaps instinct calming the little boy as Mark's arms encircled him once more. "Welcome home, little one," Mark whispered, voice thick with emotion. The name that had been on the edge of his mind suddenly felt right. "Welcome home, Leo." Leo's tiny hand grasped Mark's finger, and the connection between them solidified in that simple touch. It was the beginning of something Mark hadn't expected but was more than ready to embrace. Mark Reynolds stepped into his home, Leo cradled securely in his arms. The house, once filled only with silence and memories, now resonated with the faint coos of the little boy. The baby blinked up at Mark, his eyes wide with curiosity as if sensing the significance of this new environment. Mark took a deep breath, the weight of his decision settling into place but softened by the warmth that spread through his chest. "Welcome home, Leo," he repeated, a smile breaking across his face. He set Leo down gently on the small star-patterned blanket spread out in the living room and watched as the baby's tiny hands explored the fabric. The soft sounds of Leo's babbling filled the room, making the house feel more alive than it had in years. Mark's first night as a foster father was a blur of bottles, diapers, and sleepless hours. The night sky outside darkened, stars appearing one by one, but inside the house, Mark's focus never wavered from Leo. Each cry, each small sound sent him scrambling, driven by a mix of instinct and the need to comfort. His medical training helped him stay composed, but the emotional toll was entirely new. "It's okay, buddy," Mark murmured at 2 a.m, cradling Leo as he paced the floor. The baby's fussing quieted as he was rocked, his small fingers clutching Mark's shirt. Mark looked down, the word "Dad" slipping into his mind unbidden. He had never thought he'd say it again, but here, in the stillness of the night, it felt right. By morning, exhaustion tugged at Mark's limbs, but a deep sense of fulfillment kept him moving. Leo dozed peacefully in a bassinet Mark had set up by the living room window, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Mark made himself a cup of coffee, leaning against the counter as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the curtains. The view of his new life, unexpected and imperfect, brought a smile to his tired face. Days turned into a week, and Mark found himself settling into a routine. The quiet moments of feeding Leo in the early hours, the soft giggles that escaped the baby during bath time, and the steady hum of nursery rhymes playing in the background became the soundtrack of his days. With each passing moment, Mark felt a bond grow, deep and undeniable. Sarah visited a few days later, bringing a homemade casserole and a bag of baby essentials. She knocked on the door, peeking in with a grin when Mark answered. "And how are my favorite doctor and his new little roommate doing?" she asked, eyes twinkling with warmth. Mark chuckled, a genuine sound that hadn't graced his home in a long time. "Come in and see for yourself," he said, leading her to the living room where Leo lay on his back, batting at a hanging mobile with wide-eyed fascination. Sarah gasped softly, her smile widening. "He's perfect, Mark. Look at him," she said, kneeling beside Leo and making gentle cooing sounds that drew an amused gurgle from the baby. Mark stood back, watching as Sarah interacted with Leo. For the first time, he felt a sense of normalcy in the chaos that had taken over his life. "It's been a learning curve," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I wouldn't trade it for anything." Sarah rose, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're doing great, Mark. Emily would be so proud of you," she said, her voice soft with sincerity. The mention of Emily brought a familiar ache, but this time it was mingled with hope rather than despair. Mark nodded, his eyes misting over. "Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot." As the days passed, Mark began to venture out with Leo. One sunny afternoon, he returned to the park where he had found the baby. With Leo cradled in his arms, Mark walked the familiar paths, pointing out the ducks by the pond and the children playing on the swings. Leo's tiny face lit up at the new sights, his fingers reaching toward a fluttering butterfly. "This is where it all began," Mark whispered, sitting on the same bench where he had first discovered Leo. The moment felt profound, as if the park itself recognized the transformation of their story. Mark closed his eyes, savoring the feel of Leo's warmth against him. He knew, deep down, that life would continue to throw challenges their way, but for now, the two of them were exactly where they needed to be. As Mark Reynolds embraced fatherhood, each day with Leo brought a new lesson, challenge, and joy. The first time Leo laughed, a bright, bubbling giggle that filled the room, Mark felt something in his heart heal a little more. It was a sound that made every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, worth it. Mornings became a cherished routine. Mark would wake to the soft gurgles coming from Leo's crib, his little hands reaching up as if to greet the day. "Good morning, champ," as Mark would whisper, lifting the baby into his arms. The sunrise spilling through the window painted the room in warm hues, making those early hours feel almost magical. Leo's big eyes would meet Mark's, with a trust so pure it took Mark's breath away. The transformation of the once empty house was striking. Toys began to scatter across the living room floor, stuffed animals, colorful blocks, and a rattle that seemed to be Leo's favorite. The scent of baby powder and formula mingled with the faint aroma of fresh coffee, creating a space that felt alive, in a way Mark hadn't experienced since Emily's laughter had last echoed through the halls. One weekend morning, as Mark was changing Leo on the nursery table, a knock at the door startled him. He quickly finished, hoisting Leo onto his hip and heading to the front door. Opening it, he found Mrs. Thompson, his elderly neighbor from down the street, standing there with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I heard you've got company now," she said, peering at Leo with an expression of delight, "and I thought I'd drop off a little something." She held up a knitted baby blanket, soft and warm with intricate blue and yellow patterns. Mark's face softened. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That's incredibly kind of you." She waved off his gratitude. "It's no trouble at all. I've seen you with him, you know. You look happier. He's lucky to have you." Leo, sensing the attention, reached out a small hand and grabbed a corner of the blanket, his little fingers curling around it. Mrs. Thompson chuckled, and Mark felt a swell of gratitude for the unexpected support. As she left, Mark stood in the doorway, Leo's head resting on his shoulder, the new blanket draped over them both. He looked down at his son, he realized, the term feeling more natural by the day, and whispered, "We're not alone, buddy. we have more people rooting for us than we know. Adjusting to life as a single father came with its own set of challenges. Late nights were spent researching every detail of baby care, from the best teething remedies to baby-proofing the house. There were moments of exhaustion when Leo would cry inconsolably, his tiny fists clenched and face red, and Mark would find himself pacing the room, humming lullabies he barely remembered. But in those moments, when Leo's sobs would fade into sniffles and his little body relaxed against Mark's chest, the sense of accomplishment and relief was unmatched. One evening, after finally getting Leo to sleep, Mark sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The quiet was no longer the oppressive silence he had once known, but a peaceful interlude. The picture of Emily on the mantel caught his eye. Her bright smile, forever frozen in time, felt like a gentle reminder. "You'd love him, Em," Mark murmured, his voice breaking slightly. "I wish you could see how he's changed everything." The days turned into weeks, and soon, Mark was accustomed to bringing Leo to the grocery store, balancing a diaper bag, shopping list, and stroller. It wasn't unusual for strangers to smile at the pair, some even stopping to coo at Leo, who would babble in response, winning over every passerby with his bright eyes and easy grin. In those moments, surrounded by the mundane tasks of daily life, unloading groceries, washing bottles, and folding tiny clothes, Mark found a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known he was missing. He was no longer simply moving through the days. He was living them, each one anchored by the little boy who had come into his life unexpectedly and brought with him a new reason to wake up every morning. As the days turned into months, Mark and Leo settled into a rhythm that felt almost second nature. Mark marveled at how the small details of caring for Leo had become intertwined with his life, creating moments that were at once routine and precious. Each new day brought a milestone, some subtle and others monumental, but all significant in their own way. One afternoon, while Mark was in the kitchen preparing lunch, a sudden burst of giggles caught his attention. He peeked into the living room to find Leo on his stomach, lifting his head with wide eyes and an expression of triumph. It took a moment for Mark to realize what was happening. Leo was rolling over for the first time. "Leo, look at you," Mark said, his voice filled with amazement. He dropped the dish towel and rushed over, kneeling beside the baby as Leo rolled again, a delighted squeal escaping his tiny mouth. Mark couldn't help but laugh, a deep, joyous sound that filled the room. He reached for his phone and snapped a picture to capture the moment, knowing he'd want to remember this forever. Later that evening, Mark sent the photo to Sarah with a short message. "First roll. I can't believe how fast he's growing." Her reply came almost immediately, a string of exclamation points and a note about how proud she was of both of them. Mark leaned back against the couch, his smile softening as he looked at Leo, now dozing contentedly on a blanket with his favorite rattle clutched in his hand. "You're growing so fast, little man," Mark whispered, brushing a stray curl from Leo's forehead. "Before I know it, you'll be walking and talking." The weeks that followed brought more milestones. Leo's first tooth appeared one morning, a tiny, pearly white speck that made him fussy, but somehow even more endearing. Mark found himself reaching for teething rings and calling Sarah for tips, grateful for the advice and encouragement she offered. It was during one of these calls that Sarah suggested, "Why don't you take Leo to the park where you found him? It'd be a nice way to celebrate how far you both have come." The idea resonated deeply with Mark. The park had once been a place where he sought solitude, but now it symbolized new beginnings. The following Saturday, Mark bundled Leo up and took him to the park. The autumn air was crisp, and leaves crunched underfoot as they made their way down familiar paths. Mark pointed out squirrels darting between the trees and ducks gliding on the pond, narrating their short walk as Leo watched with wide, fascinated eyes. When they reached the bench where Mark had first found Leo, he sat down, balancing the baby on his lap. Leo reached up, his little hand patting Mark's face as if sensing the significance of the moment. "This is where it all began, Leo," Mark said softly, feeling the weight of the past year settle comfortably in his chest. The baby responded with a happy babble, as if in agreement, and Mark chuckled, pressing a kiss to Leo's forehead. The walk back to the car was peaceful, punctuated by Leo's occasional giggles and Mark's soft humming. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mark felt whole. It wasn't just about surviving each day. It was about living, experiencing joy, and cherishing the present. Mark's life soon became filled with the simple wonders of fatherhood. Bath time, once a messy ordeal, evolved into a shared delight. Leo would splash with glee, water droplets catching the light and sparkling like tiny gems. Mark would laugh as he wiped water from his face, delighting in the sound of Leo's laughter bouncing off the tiled walls. Bedtime, too, became a cherished ritual. Mark would read stories aloud, his voice soft and melodic as Leo's eyelids grew heavy. The final moment before sleep came was always the same. Leo's tiny hand would reach out to touch Mark's as if needing that last bit of reassurance. "Good night, little man," Mark would say, his voice a whisper. "Daddy's here." As Mark sat beside the crib watching Leo drift into dreams, he realized that the journey he had embarked on was more than he ever imagined it could be. It was filled with love and hope, two things he once thought he had lost forever. As Leo continued to grow, so did Mark's confidence as a father. Their home had transformed from a place of quiet solitude to a sanctuary filled with giggles, babbling, and the sound of tiny footsteps learning to find their balance. By Leo's second birthday, Mark could barely keep up with the toddler, who now explored every corner of the house with boundless curiosity. One evening, after a long day of work and play, Mark settled into his armchair with Leo nestled against him. A children's book spread across their laps. As he read, Leo's eyes began to droop, and he snuggled deeper into Mark's chest. It was during these quiet moments that Mark often thought of Emily, wishing she could see the life they had managed to create despite the odds. Suddenly, Leo's little voice, usually lively and full of questions, spoke softly. "Dada?" The word was simple, but it hit Mark like a warm, unexpected wave. It was the first time Leo had said it, and the sound made Mark's chest tighten with emotion. He paused, closing his eyes for a moment to let the joy sink in. "Yes, Leo?" he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, trying to keep the tremor of happiness from showing. Leo pointed at the photo of Emily on the mantel, an image he'd seen many times but never asked about before. "Who dat?" he asked, his gaze inquisitive. Mark swallowed hard, a mixture of surprise and sadness blooming inside him. He hadn't anticipated this moment so soon. He adjusted Leo on his lap and looked up at the photograph of Emily, her smile radiant and eyes filled with the love that once anchored his world. "That's someone very special," he said slowly. "That's Emily. She was someone who loved us very much." Leo seemed satisfied with the answer, for now his attention drifting back to the book. But Mark's heart continued to pound as he replayed the question in his mind. It was a reminder that one day, Leo would ask more and want to know more. And Mark knew he would be ready to share the story when the time came with all the love it deserved. The following day, Mark took Leo to their favorite spot in the park, the same bench where everything had changed. The weather was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Leo toddled ahead, his tiny feet kicking up the fallen leaves as he chased after a butterfly. "Slow down, buddy," Mark called out, laughing as Leo turned with a grin that could light up any room. It was in moments like these that Mark felt the fullness of his life, the pieces of the past blending seamlessly with the present. A couple pushing a stroller passed by, giving Mark a nod and a smile. "Your son is adorable," the woman said, her voice kind. "Thank you," Mark responded, warmth spreading through his chest at the words. The title of father felt right, as if it had been his all along. Leo, unaware of the exchange, pointed at a bird perched on a branch and shouted, "Dada, look." "I see it, Leo," Mark said, moving closer and lifting Leo into his arms so he could get a better view. The bird chirped and fluttered its wings, and Leo clapped with excitement. Mark felt a rush of gratitude, a silent acknowledgement that life, with all its twists and turns, had brought him exactly where he needed to be. That night, as Mark tucked Leo into bed, he thought about the journey they had taken together. From the lonely days when the house had felt empty and hollow to now, where even the quiet moments were filled with peace. Leo reached out his small hand as he always did, and Mark held it, savoring the warmth of that connection. "Night, Dada," Leo murmured, his eyes already drooping with sleep. "Good night, Leo," Mark whispered, brushing a soft kiss on his son's forehead. "I love you more than anything." As he stood up and turned off the light, the weight of those simple words hung in the air, a testament to how far they had come. The once empty house now held a story, one filled with resilience, love, and a future that shone as bright as the stars Leo dreamed beneath. Life continued on, weaving together moments of joy, challenges, and the occasional surprise that came with raising Leo. By the time Leo turned 4, he was a whirlwind of energy and questions, his curiosity boundless. Mark delighted in answering as many as he could, even when the questions veered into the impossible. Why do birds fly? Or where does the sun sleep? One quiet evening, as the golden light of dusk bathed their home, a knock at the door disrupted their routine. Leo, playing with his blocks on the living room floor, glanced up curiously as Mark wiped his hands on a dish towel and approached the door. When he opened it, he found himself staring at a couple he didn't recognize. The man had a calm, determined expression, while the woman's eyes shone with nervous energy. "Hello, are you Mark Reynolds?" the man asked, his voice steady but edged with emotion. "Yes, I am," Mark said, his mind racing. He glanced back at Leo, who was now standing up, clutching a small stuffed bear to his chest. The woman took a step forward. "We're the Carters," she said, her voice breaking slightly. We're Leo's biological parents." The world seemed to tilt as Mark processed the words. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, and he instinctively stepped back, placing himself between Leo and the strangers. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" he managed, trying to keep his voice calm. The man, David Carter, nodded. "We know this is a shock. It's taken us years to find him, and we only just discovered that he's been with you." He hesitated, his gaze softening as he looked past Mark to the little boy now peeking out with wide eyes. Leo's voice cut through the tension. "Dada? Who are they?" Mark's throat tightened. He turned and mustered a smile. "Just some visitors, Leo. Why don't you play with Mr. Bear in your room for a bit, okay?" Leo hesitated, eyes darting between Mark and the couple, but nodded and trotted off to his room. Turning back, Mark felt his pulse steady as he faced the Carters again. "I need you to explain how you found us and what this means." The Carters exchanged a look, one of shared pain and understanding. The woman, Emily Carter, spoke first. "We lost everything a few years ago. Jobs, home, we couldn't provide for Leo, and it broke us to leave him, but it was our only choice. We never stopped looking, never stopped hoping we could make it right." David took a breath, his voice wavering. "We wanted to come forward sooner, but we had nothing to offer him then. We only found out recently that he was placed with you and has been thriving." Mark felt a mixture of emotions rush through him: anger, fear, and an unexpected pang of empathy. He had thought about this moment, the one where Leo's past might come knocking. But now that it was here, it felt far more complex than he ever imagined. "What do you want?" Mark asked, his voice firm but not unkind. "We want to know him, if you'll allow it," Emily said, tears brimming in her eyes. "We don't want to disrupt his life or take him from the only home he's known, but we want him to know where he came from and that we never stopped loving him." Mark's chest tightened as he processed their words. He glanced toward Leo's room, where quiet giggles drifted out as the little boy played. The last thing Mark wanted was to see that joy diminish, but he also knew the importance of truth and of family, no matter how painful it might be. "Let me think this over," Mark said finally, his voice soft but resolute. "I need time to figure out what's best for Leo." David nodded, understanding etched into every line of his face. "That's all we ask." As the door closed and the echoes of the conversation settled around him, Mark sank into a chair, head in his hands. This was a crossroads he hadn't prepared for, but one that he knew would change their lives forever. The days following the visit from the Carters were filled with tension and contemplation. Mark's mind spun with questions, fears, and the memory of the heartfelt plea in Emily and David's eyes. He spent hours watching Leo, who remained blissfully unaware of the storm swirling around him, his laughter filling the house and momentarily easing Mark's heart. One evening, Mark sat with Sarah in the kitchen, the late-night quiet punctuated by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Sarah had listened patiently as Mark recounted the encounter, her brow furrowing with concern. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Mark ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion lining his features. "I don't know. They don't want to take him away, but they want to be part of his life. And what if that's what's best for him? He deserves to know where he came from. Sarah nodded, understanding the impossible weight of the choice before him. You're right. But he also deserves to feel safe and loved, just as he has been with you. Mark sighed, looking down at his coffee cup, its warmth long gone. I just don't want him to feel like he's losing what he knows. But I can't ignore this either. The next day, Mark sat down with Leo in the living room. Leo's favorite toy trucks were scattered around, and he was mid-race when Mark gently put a hand on his shoulder. Hey buddy, can we talk for a minute? Leo looked up, his big eyes curious. Okay, Dada, he said, sitting cross-legged and clutching a blue truck in his small hands. Mark took a breath, trying to keep his voice steady. Remember when you asked me about the picture on the mantel? That's someone who was very important to me, and today I want to tell you about someone important to you. Leo's brow furrowed in the way that it did when he was thinking hard. Who, Dada? There are two people who cared for you a lot before you came to live with me. They're called David and Emily, and they're your biological parents, Mark said, watching Leo's reaction closely. The little boy tilted his head, processing the new information. Like a mama and a papa? He asked, his voice soft with confusion. Yes, like that, Mark nodded, feeling a pinch in his chest. They couldn't take care of you when you were very little, but they always thought about you and loved you. And now they've found you, and they would like to meet you and know you, if that's okay with you. Leo was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the floor as he twirled the wheel of his truck. Will you still be my Dada? He finally asked, his voice tiny and unsure. Mark felt a lump form in his throat, and he reached out to pull Leo into his lap. Always, Leo. I will always be your Dada, no matter what. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. Leo leaned against Mark's chest, his small hands gripping his shirt. Okay, Dada, I want to meet them. Mark kissed the top of Leo's head, his eyes stinging as he whispered, I'm so proud of you, buddy. He rocked him gently, the weight of what lay ahead pressing on him, but bolstered by Leo's resilience and trust. Later that week, Mark arranged for David and Emily to visit. He prepped Leo by telling stories about the Carters and showing him pictures that they had provided. When the day came, the atmosphere in the house was both tense and hopeful. Mark opened the door to find David and Emily standing there, a mix of nerves and anticipation in their eyes. Hi, Mark said, stepping aside to let them in. Leo stood behind him, clutching Mr. Bear tightly, his eyes wide. Emily knelt down, her smile trembling. Hi, Leo, she said, her voice gentle. I'm Emily, and this is David. We're so happy to see you. Leo looked at Mark for reassurance, and when Mark nodded with a smile, Leo took a small step forward. Hi, he whispered, eyes darting between them. David's eyes glistened as he reached out, stopping just short of touching Leo. It's good to meet you, Leo. We've waited a long time for this. In that moment, as introductions were made and hesitant smiles turned into shared laughter, Mark felt the hope of a future where love could find room to grow, even in the most unexpected of places. The first meeting with David and Emily was a tentative dance of emotions. Mark watched as Leo sat between him and the Carters, his small body angled toward Mark, but with eyes that flitted curiously between his newfound parents. Emily and David were gentle, their voices soft and filled with wonder as they asked Leo simple questions, his favorite color, what games he liked to play, and whether he preferred pancakes or waffles. Leo, still gripping Mr. Bear, warmed up slowly. When Emily showed him a small photo album they had brought, filled with pictures of Leo as a baby and of themselves, his eyes lit up. That's me? He asked, pointing at an image of a tiny infant bundled in a striped blanket. Emily's eyes glistened with tears, and she nodded. Yes, that's you, sweetheart. We took that picture when you were just a few days old. Leo giggled at the sight of himself and looked up at Mark with excitement. Dada, look, it's me when I was tiny. Mark's heart swelled at the sight of Leo's joy, even as he felt the bittersweet sting of sharing these moments. He smiled and leaned in, touching the photo. Yes, it is, buddy. You were the cutest little baby. David, who had been watching quietly, cleared his throat, the emotion clear in his eyes. We're so glad we can share these with you, Leo, he said, his voice wavering. The room seemed to exhale together, the tension easing as they all found their rhythm in this new dynamic. Over the next few weeks, visits became more frequent. At first, they were just an hour here and there at Mark's house, with the Carters reading stories or playing with Leo's favorite toys. Each visit built upon the last, slowly fostering a sense of familiarity. Leo's shyness melted away bit by bit, and soon he was greeting David and Emily with cheerful waves and bursts of laughter when they arrived. Mark observed these interactions with a mix of pride and protectiveness. It was a delicate balance, making space for the Carters while ensuring Leo felt secure in their little world. One Saturday afternoon, Emily suggested a visit to the park, and Mark agreed, thinking it would be good for Leo to see them outside the safe walls of home. They chose a sunny day for the outing. The park, where this journey had begun, seemed fitting for this new chapter. Leo ran ahead on the path, giggling as he chased after a butterfly, while Emily and David walked nearby, their eyes never straying from him. Mark trailed behind, a silent guardian and witness to the unfolding scene. "Mark," David said, slowing his pace to walk beside him. "I can't thank you enough for this, for giving us the chance to be part of Leo's life." Mark glanced at David, noting the sincerity etched into his features. "Leo's happiness comes first," he said. "If being with you makes him feel more complete, then it's worth it." David nodded, his voice low with emotion. "We never wanted to take him away from you. You're as much his father as we could ever hope to be." Mark felt a weight lift from his chest, a subtle shift from competition to collaboration. "He's lucky to have so many people who love him," he said, the words coming easier than he expected. Emily called out, waving a hand as Leo darted off the path toward a patch of dandelions. "Careful, Leo," she said, laughing as he picked the yellow flowers and ran back, his small hands outstretched with his bounty. "Dada, look!" Leo shouted, presenting the flowers to Mark, who bent down and took them with a wide smile. "They're perfect," Mark said, ruffling Leo's hair as he glanced at David and Emily, who were watching with matching smiles. It was a moment of unity, a hint of what could be, a family stitched together by shared love, no matter how unconventional. As the day wound down and the sun dipped lower in the sky, Leo lay stretched out on a picnic blanket, eyes growing heavy. Emily tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and whispered, "He looks so peaceful." Mark nodded, his own heart full as he watched his son rest. This was a new kind of peace, one born from acceptance and hope. They weren't just navigating an impossible situation, they were building something new, together. In the weeks that followed, Mark and the Carters worked together to find a rhythm that felt right for everyone. Weekdays were filled with the usual routine. Mark dropped Leo off at preschool, attended his shifts at the clinic, and returned home for dinner and bedtime stories. But weekends now included visits to David and Emily's house or shared outings to places Leo loved, like the zoo or the children's museum. One Saturday morning, the five of them found themselves at the local aquarium. Leo pressed his little hands against the glass tank, eyes wide with awe as colorful fish darted by. "Dada, look! That fish has stripes!" he exclaimed, pointing at a clownfish that swam through a maze of coral. Mark knelt beside him, laughing at the enthusiasm. "It does, buddy, just like in your storybook." Emily and David stood nearby, watching with smiles that were a blend of joy and wistfulness. "It's amazing how much he notices," Emily said softly, glancing at Mark. "Thank you for letting us be here for moments like these." Mark's eyes met hers, the unspoken understanding between them growing stronger with each interaction. Leo deserves as much love as he can get, and he has it, from all of us. As Leo continued to thrive, Mark found himself more at ease with the situation. The initial apprehension was giving way to a new kind of balance. Evenings after joint activities often ended with David and Emily saying their goodbyes at Mark's front door, a routine that once felt foreign but now brought a sense of unity. One evening, after the Carters had left, Leo sat on the floor, sleepily playing with his toy cars. "Dada, did you know Mama Emily says I have her eyes?" he asked, his voice soft and filled with the wonder of a child making new discoveries about himself. Mark's heart ached and warmed at the same time. He sat down next to Leo and pulled him into a gentle hug. "Yes, you do, buddy. And you know what else? You have my love. Always." Leo's sleepy eyes brightened, and he snuggled closer. I love you too, Dada. One day, as autumn leaves fell and painted the world in shades of amber and gold, Mark received a call from David. We've been thinking, David said, his voice hesitant but determined. Would you be open to having us join you for one of Leo's preschool events? There's an autumn showcase coming up, and we thought it might be nice if he had all of us there. Mark paused, the request striking a chord. The thought of them all together, openly supporting Leo, felt like a significant step. I think that would be a great idea, Mark said, a smile tugging at his lips. Leo will love it. When the day of the autumn showcase arrived, Leo's face lit up as soon as he saw his parents, both sets of them, sitting together in the front row. The classroom was decorated with paper leaves and drawings of pumpkins, a celebration of the season. Leo stood on the small stage with his classmates, reciting lines from a simple poem about the beauty of fall. Mark watched with pride, his heart swelling as Leo delivered his part with confidence, pausing just long enough to look at him and grin. David and Emily clapped enthusiastically, their faces beaming with love. After the performance, Leo ran up to them, his small hands grabbing Mark's first, then reaching out for David and Emily. Did you see me? He asked, eyes wide with excitement. Emily knelt down and hugged him. We did, sweetheart. You were amazing. David joined in, ruffling Leo's hair. We're so proud of you, Leo. Mark stood back, taking in the scene with a quiet smile. The moment was chaotic, filled with chatter and laughter, but it felt right. They were not just navigating this journey, they were embracing it, learning that love was not limited or divided, but multiplied. That evening, after everyone had returned home and the house had quieted down, Mark sat by Leo's bed, watching him drift off to sleep. The day's memories played through his mind, filling him with a sense of profound gratitude. Life had taken a turn he never anticipated, but in this shared experience, he found something better than he could have imagined, a family that was whole in its own beautiful, unconventional way. As the seasons changed, the blended family of Mark, Leo, and the Carters found themselves moving into new traditions. The upcoming winter holidays provided the perfect opportunity to create memories and navigate their newfound relationship. Mark, who had once dreaded the silence of holiday nights, now found himself busy with planning. Strings of lights twinkled from the eaves of his home, and the scent of pine filled the living room from the decorated tree standing proudly. Dada, can we put the star on top? Leo's voice was filled with excitement as he tugged on Mark's hand. His cheeks were flushed from the cold out. Of course, buddy, Mark replied, lifting Leo onto his shoulders so he could place the star atop the tree. Leo giggled as he reached up with both hands, the glittery decoration catching the soft glow of the room. When he managed to balance it perfectly, both Mark and Leo let out triumphant cheers. The doorbell rang, and Leo's eye, "It is," Mark said with a smile, feeling a warm flutter in his chest at the sight of Leo's joy. He opened the door to find Emily and David bundled up in scarves and hats, their arms filled with gifts and plates of food. "Merry early Christmas," Emily said, stepping inside and leaning down to give Leo a kiss on the forehead. David ruffled Leo's hair, his eyes twinkling with the same joy. "Merry Christmas," bookmark. The evening unfolded in a cozy, joyful blur. The adults shared stories while Leo ran circles around the room, showing off his favorite ornaments and the train that chugged along the base of the tree. Dinner was a potluck of contributions. Mark's classic roast, Emily's famous cranberry sauce, and David's spiced apple cider that filled the room with its warm, inviting scent. After dinner, they gathered by the fire for stories. Leo nestled in Mark's lap, while Emily read aloud from a children's book filled with holiday tales. David occasionally chimed in with silly voices that sent Leo into fits of laughter. Mark glanced around at the smiling faces, a lump forming in his throat as he realized how far they had come. The room, once so quiet and somber during holidays, was now filled with love and laughter. As the evening drew to a close, Emily set down her empty mug and exchanged a look with David. "We've been thinking," she began, turning to Mark, "about starting a new tradition together. How would you feel about spending Christmas morning as a family, with all of us here?" Mark felt a warmth spread through him, softening the edges of old fears. He looked down at Leo, who was fighting to keep his eyes open, and nodded. "I think that would be perfect." David's expression relaxed into a smile. Then it settled. "We'll bring the cinnamon rolls," he joked, earning a laugh from everyone. Christmas morning arrived with a quiet stillness, broken only by Leo's excited shouts as he woke up and dashed into the living room. Mark followed, pulling on his robe, and smiled at the sight of Leo, already diving into the pile of presents with eyes wide with wonder. Soon after, Emily and David arrived, their cheeks pink from the cold and arms laden with more gifts and trays of food. The morning was filled with the rustle of wrapping paper, the bright sound of Leo's laughter, and the clinking of mugs as the adults toasted to new beginnings with steaming cups of coffee and cocoa. Leo danced around the room, showing off each toy and book he unwrapped, his joy infectious. "Look, Dada, I got a train set," Leo exclaimed, holding up a box with a picture of a shiny red locomotive. Emily and David beamed, joining in on Leo's excitement. Mark's eyes met theirs, and he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. They had found a way to blend their lives together for Leo's happiness, and in doing so, they'd created something even greater. A shared love that extended beyond the boundaries of traditional family roles. As the sun rose higher and the morning light bathed the room, Mark looked around at his son and the two people who had become an unexpected yet cherished part of his life. For the first time in years, the holiday felt whole, filled with the warmth of a complete family. The months that followed their shared Christmas were filled with moments that wove the family closer together. By the time spring arrived, Leo had grown taller, his curiosity and boundless energy leading to endless new discoveries. The house, once marked by quiet evenings, now buzzed with laughter, impromptu dance parties, and art projects that left trails of glitter in impossible-to-clean corners. One sunny Saturday, Mark decided to take Leo to the park, inviting David and Emily to join them. The park had become more than a place for Mark. It was a symbol of change, growth, and resilience. As they arrived, Leo raced ahead, his giggles carried by the spring breeze. "Careful, buddy," Mark called, watching with a smile as Leo sped toward the playground, climbing the slide with unrestrained glee. Emily and David walked up, their expressions reflecting the same joy that filled Mark's heart. "He's fearless," David said, chuckling as Leo waved wildly from the top of the slide. "That's one thing he definitely didn't get from me," Mark replied with a laugh. The three of them found a bench where they could watch Leo, their conversation punctuated by the delighted shouts of children playing. Emily glanced at Mark, her eyes soft. "It's amazing to see how happy he is. He's thriving, and that's because of you." Mark shifted, feeling the weight of the compliment. "He's happy because he's surrounded by love, yours, mine, all of ours. It took me a while to realize that the more love he has, the better." David nodded in agreement. "I'm grateful we've reached this place. It's not what I expected, but it's better than I could have imagined." The trio fell into a comfortable silence, watching as Leo ran up to them, his face flushed from play. "Dada, Mama Emily, Papa David, did you see me go down the slide really fast?" "We sure did," Emily said, laughing as she leaned forward to ruffle his hair. "Again?" Leo asked, eyes sparkling with hope. Mark grinned. "Go for it, champ. We're watching." Leo dashed off, leaving the three adults to exchange looks that spoke of understanding and a shared sense of fulfillment. They had built this life not through conventional paths, but through choices rooted in love and sacrifice. As the seasons turned, Leo's preschool graduation loomed on the horizon. Mark found himself marveling at how quickly time passed. One moment, Leo was a baby, wrapped in a blanket under a park bench, and the next, he was a confident little boy practicing songs for his school performance. On the day of the ceremony, the preschool auditorium buzzed with excitement. Children in tiny graduation caps fidgeted on the stage, while parents filled the seats with eager anticipation. Mark sat in the front row, flanked by Emily and David. The three of them exchanged smiles, their shared pride palpable. Leo's eyes scanned the audience until they found Mark, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Dada," he mouthed, waving as Mark waved back with an equally broad smile. Emily wiped a tear from her eye, and David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The ceremony began, and Leo's class sang a song about learning and growing that filled the room with the sweet, off-key voices of children. When it came time for each child to receive their certificate, Mark's heart thudded as Leo's name was called. He stood up, clapping louder than anyone else, feeling a surge of love that was almost overwhelming. Leo accepted his diploma, his small hand clutching it tightly as he turned to the audience and waved, his eyes seeking out his family. Mark, David, and Emily stood, their eyes glistening with pride and joy. It was a moment they shared without words, bound by the love they all had for Leo. After the ceremony, Leo ran straight to them, holding out his certificate. "Look, Dada, I did it!" he said, beaming with excitement. Mark scooped him up, laughing as tears of happiness threatened to spill. "You did, buddy. We're so proud of you." David and Emily leaned in, each adding their congratulations and hugs. The four of them stood there, a cluster of shared history, love, and hope, surrounded by the chatter and laughter of other families. They weren't just two families learning to coexist. They had become one, united by the unwavering bond they shared through Leo. With preschool behind him and summer stretching out ahead, Leo's days were filled with adventures that only a child could conjure. Mark planned outings with Leo, and the Carters often joined them. The summer air was warm, filled with the scents of freshly cut grass and the hum of cicadas. It was a season of growth, laughter, and newfound freedom. One weekend, Mark suggested a day trip to a nearby lake. The idea was met with unanimous excitement. Emily and David packed a picnic, while Mark prepared Leo's favorite snacks and sunscreen. When they arrived, Leo's eyes widened at the sight of the shimmering water, reflecting the clear blue sky above. "Dada, can we go in?" Leo asked, bouncing on his toes with excitement. "Of course, buddy," Mark said, his smile matching Leo's. He turned to see David and Emily laying out a blanket under the shade of a tall oak tree. Emily waved them over, holding up a brightly colored beach ball. "Come on, let's see who can keep the ball in the air the longest," she called out. Soon, laughter echoed across the lakeside as Leo, Mark, David, and Emily played, splashing in the water and sending the ball back and forth. Leo's squeals of delight rang out every time he managed to hit the ball, his joy infectious. At one point, David hoisted Leo onto his shoulders, and the little boy's giggles grew louder as he reached for the sky. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, they gathered for lunch on the blanket, surrounded by the easy chatter of other families and the gentle lapping of water. Leo lay in Mark's lap, eyes half closed from exhaustion and contentment. Emily brushed a damp curl from Leo's forehead and smiled. "You've made this summer unforgettable, Mark," she said, her voice sincere. "For Leo and for us." Mark felt a rush of warmth at her words. "I think we've all done that together," he said, looking at David, who nodded in agreement. "We're a team," David added, lifting his bottle of iced tea in a casual toast. "To more days like this." "To more days like this," Mark echoed, clinking his bottle with David's. The days rolled into weeks, and the summer became a tapestry of shared moments. They visited farmers' markets where Leo would pick out the juiciest strawberries, went on nature walks where he would marvel at butterflies, and spent countless evenings on Mark's porch, sipping lemonade as the fireflies danced in the yard. One night, as Leo played with sparklers under the watchful eyes of Emily and David, Mark leaned back in his chair, soaking in the scene. The glow of the sparklers lit up Leo's face, his expression a mix of concentration and joy. Emily turned to Mark, a soft smile playing on her lips. "He looks so happy," she said. "He is," Mark agreed, his voice filled with emotion. "And so am I." Summer drew to a close, and with it came the promise of a new chapter, kindergarten. The excitement in the house was palpable as Mark and Leo prepared for the big day. Emily and David joined in, bringing over a new backpack decorated with Leo's favorite cartoon characters. On the morning of his first day, Leo stood at the front door, dressed in a bright blue shirt and shorts, his new backpack slung over his tiny shoulders. "Dada, will you come with me?" he asked, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and nerves. Mark knelt beside him, adjusting the straps of the backpack and smiling. "Of course, buddy. And guess what? Mama Emily and Papa David are coming too." Leo's face lit up, and he nodded, reassured by the thought of all of them being there. The drive to the school was filled with chatter about what he might learn and the friends he would make. When they arrived, the four of them walked Leo to his classroom. The teacher, a warm woman named Mrs. Jensen, greeted them at the door. Leo turned, his eyes darting between Mark, Emily, and David. "I'll be okay, right?" Mark bent down, placing a gentle hand on Leo's shoulder. You'll be more than okay, Leo. You're going to have an amazing time. Emily leaned in, brushing a kiss on Leo's cheek. We'll all be right here when you finish, David added with a grin, and we want to hear all about it. Leo took a deep breath, nodded, and then walked into the classroom, turning back only once to wave before finding his seat. Mark felt a surge of pride and the familiar, tender ache of seeing his son take another step forward. They stood there side by side, a family bound by the love they had fought to create, watching Leo start his new journey. Leo's start in kindergarten brought a new rhythm to Mark's life. Mornings were now a rush of packing lunches, finding lost socks, and making sure Leo had everything he needed. The days were quieter without Leo's constant chatter filling the house, but they were also an opportunity for Mark, Emily, and David to strengthen their bond as a co-parenting team. One Friday evening, after a busy week at school, Mark invited the Carters over for dinner. It was meant to be a casual get-together, a chance for them to talk and share updates on Leo's progress. The scent of baked lasagna filled the air, mingling with the warmth of the setting sun streaming through the window. Leo's been talking about his new friend from school, Emily said as she set the table, a smile playing on her lips. What's your name again? Amelia, Mark said with a chuckle. He says she's the fastest runner in the class. It's all he talks about these days. David laughed as he helped pour lemonade into glasses. I'm glad he's making friends so quickly. He's got such a bright spirit, it's hard not to love him. As the conversation flowed, Mark realized how natural these moments had become. They weren't just navigating shared responsibilities. They were sharing their lives, memories, and the small, day-to-day victories that came with raising Leo. When the timer beeped, signaling that dinner was ready, Leo burst into the room with an energy that seemed boundless, his eyes lighting up at the sight of the table set with his favorite meal. Lasagna, he shouted, clapping his hands and bouncing on his toes. The adults laughed, their shared amusement adding warmth to the room. They all sat down, plates passed around and conversations weaving seamlessly between bites of food. Leo spoke animatedly about his day at school, describing how he and Amelia had built the tallest block tower during playtime. Emily and David listened intently, their smiles genuine and eyes soft with affection. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where Leo's eyes grew heavy as he curled up on the couch next to Mark. Emily reached over, tucking a blanket around him, and David rested a hand on Leo's back. The sight of them all together, caring for Leo, filled Mark with a profound sense of peace. Bookmark, go back. In the following weeks, their bond grew stronger as they found more reasons to come together. Weekend trips to the park became a shared tradition. One Saturday, as they watched Leo race through the grass with a kite trailing behind him, David turned to Mark with a thoughtful expression. You know, it's funny how life works out, David said, his eyes following Leo's bright kite. I never imagined we'd be here doing this together. Mark nodded, the breeze tussling his hair. Me neither, but I'm glad we are. Emily joined them, her hand lightly brushing David's. Leo's happier because of it. He gets to see us all getting along and supporting him. That means everything. Mark looked at them both, his heart full. It does, and he knows he's loved. That's what matters most. Leo ran back to them, his face flushed and eyes gleaming. Look, Dada! The kite stayed up the whole time. He leaned against Mark, catching his breath. You did great, buddy, Mark said, wrapping an arm around Leo's small shoulders. David and Emily leaned in, adding their own words of praise. In that moment, the shared love they had for Leo bound them tightly together, stronger than any challenges they had faced. As autumn deepened, Leo's school hosted a family day, inviting parents to join their children for games and activities. The event was set in the school's courtyard, decorated with pumpkins, hay bales, and banners fluttering in the crisp breeze. Mark, Emily, and David arrived together, their presence drawing curious glances and warm smiles from the other parents. Leo was already waiting, bouncing with excitement. You all came, he shouted, running to them and grabbing each of their hands. Of course we wouldn't miss it, Mark said, squeezing Leo's hand. The day was filled with sack races, face painting, and shared laughter. Mark felt a sense of belonging he hadn't expected. A feeling echoed in the way David cheered for Leo during a tug-of-war game, or how Emily helped Leo paint a pumpkin, smudges of orange on her cheeks. When the day ended and the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Leo hugged each of them in turn. "Best day ever," he declared, eyes twinkling. The three adults exchanged smiles, knowing that, despite the complexity of their journey, they had found a way to be a family. And for Leo, that love was everything. The years continued to pass, marked by countless milestones and moments that bound the unconventional family even tighter. Leo grew into an energetic and thoughtful young boy, thriving in the supportive environment created by Mark, Emily, and David. The family found ways to balance their roles seamlessly, blending traditions and creating new memories that Leo would cherish for a lifetime. One winter evening, as snow fell gently outside, Leo sat at the dining table working on a school project about family heritage. He scribbled names and drew little pictures to represent each member of his family. When he finished, he held up his work, smiling proudly. The paper showed a tree with branches labeled Dada Mark, Mama Emily, and Papa David, each surrounded by drawings of shared moments, camping trips, birthdays, and picnics. "Look, Dada," Leo said, holding the paper out to Mark. "I drew our whole family." Mark's eyes softened as he took in the drawing. It was a testament to their journey, how love and commitment had turned an unexpected situation into a bond that defied traditional labels. "It's perfect, Leo," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. Emily and David looked on, their smiles tinged with emotion. Emily reached over to touch Mark's arm, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had built together. "You did an amazing job, sweetheart," she said to Leo, her voice warm. "Does this mean we're like a superhero team?" Leo asked, eyes wide with excitement. "Because we all help each other, right?" David chuckled, nodding. "Exactly, kiddo. The best kind of team, one that always has each other's back." Leo beamed, then turned back to his project, adding little capes to each drawing as if they were all heroes in his eyes. Mark exchanged a look with Emily and David, their shared understanding bringing an unspoken promise. They would continue to be that team, no matter what. Spring brought new beginnings, including Leo's first big school play. He had a small role, but to the family, it was a major event. On the night of the performance, Mark, Emily, and David sat together in the crowded auditorium, their anticipation palpable. When Leo stepped onto the stage, wearing a tiny costume and reciting his lines with a mix of confidence and innocence, the three adults clapped the loudest, their cheers blending into one supportive voice. After the play, Leo ran up to him, a grin stretched across his face. "Did you see me? I didn't forget any of my lines," he exclaimed, eyes sparkling with pride. Mark scooped him up, spinning him around. "You were amazing, buddy. We're so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily and David each gave Leo hugs and words of praise, their happiness reflected in their eyes. That night, as they celebrated with hot cocoa at Mark's house, Leo's laughter filled the room, a sound that spoke of joy, belonging, and love. It was a reminder that despite the challenges and unexpected turns life had brought, they had found their way together. As the years continued, Leo's unique family became a source of curiosity and admiration among friends and teachers. When asked, Leo would simply shrug and smile, saying, "I have 2 dads and a mom who love me. That's what makes us special." Mark, Emily, and David watched him grow with a shared sense of pride. They knew their journey had started with difficult decisions and moments of uncertainty, but they had built something resilient and beautiful. Each passing year, they celebrated holidays as a family, cheered Leo on at soccer games, and supported him through challenges big and small. One afternoon, as they sat together at the park, now a place that held the full story of their journey, Leo lay sprawled on the grass, looking up at the sky. "Dada," he said, glancing over at Mark, "do you think our story is like one of those in my books, where people come together and make something amazing happen?" Mark met his eyes, a smile spreading across his face. "Yes, Leo. Our story is exactly like that." David leaned back against the tree, the sun casting a warm glow across their little group. "And it's only going to get better," he added, sharing a look with Emily and Mark that spoke of shared gratitude and love. Leo nodded, satisfied. The park, once just a place of solitude for Mark, was now a symbol of the family they had built. And as the wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the sounds of their laughter, Mark felt a deep, abiding peace. Their family was unconventional, but it was theirs, built with love, strength, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. The story of Leo and his unconventional family is more than just a tale of challenges and new beginnings. It is a testament to love, resilience, and the power of embracing change. From being found as an infant under a park bench to growing up surrounded by the unwavering support of Mark, Emily, and David, Leo's journey teaches us that family is defined not by blood, but by those who choose to love and support one another. This story reminds us that love knows no boundaries, and that the willingness to adapt and grow can turn life's unexpected moments into the foundation for something beautiful. The bond that grew between Mark, Emily, and David showcased the power of forgiveness and collaboration, proving that true family is built on compassion and commitment. As Leo thrived with the care of his 3 parents, their shared joy and mutual dedication highlighted the importance of being present for one another. Leo's story encourages us to appreciate the families we create and the moments we share, knowing that love is what truly defines us. If this story moves you, let us know by engaging with us. Comment with the number 1 if you thought the story was great, or the number 2 if you found it amazing. We'd love to hear your stories too, so share them in the comments below and tell us how they resonate with you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay connected and never miss out on more inspirational stories. Your thoughts and reflections are invaluable, so please share what you felt about Leo's journey in the comments below.